tonight I wanted to talk to you about several important developments when it comes to both the activities of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, the statements coming from senior figures in the Yemeni Ansarullah movement regarding the United States and its actions in the Red Sea. And I also wanted to talk to you about the ceasefire talks and what's happening on the negotiating front when it comes to the ceasefire between the Israeli and the Palestinian side. I'm going to start off with the Palestinian resistance. The Palestinian resistance in Jabalia in particular, I mean all across of Gaza, but Jabalia, why I'm mentioning it is because it's been facing an extremely aggressive genocide campaign for the past 70 days, over 70 days now, with the Israeli implementation of what they call the General's Plan, which is basically an implementation of an ethnic cleansing campaign when it comes to the northern part of Gaza, establishing a new reality where they would expel all of the Palestinian people and potentially have settlements inside of Gaza in the future. Now, I had my take on that previously, and that was due to several reasons. I mentioned before that Israel, of course, doesn't really have a long-term strategy based on their actions in Gaza. They would like to portray it as something different, but they really do not have a strategy because they have been repeating the same recipe, the same formula that has failed time after time. And that proves that these people are insane. They're insane psychopaths. Nothing has worked previously when it comes to the destruction and the killing of civilians to be used as leverage against the Palestinian resistance. They are repeating the same formula, albeit with a much higher level of devastation and disaster when it comes to Gaza, thinking that they could let the Palestinian resistance submit to their will and potentially take more positions from the Palestinian resistance when it comes to the negotiations. Because many things that happen on the front during the war are directly linked with the ceasefire talks. The ceasefire talks continue and there is aggression on the ground, and that happens because, well, at least from the Israeli side, for them to try and apply more pressure on the Palestinian resistance to give in, to potentially give up some of their conditions and soften their approach when it comes to the negotiations so that it's more in the favor of Israel rather than the Palestinian resistance. But again, time after time, it failed. It did not work. And that is the definition of insanity. That's what Israel has been doing. Another reason Benjamin Netanyahu could have been doing this, especially in North Gaza, is to appeal to his ultra-right-wing allies in his government, because these people outright call for settlements inside of Gaza. To them, it's part of Israel. Well, to many of them, part of Israel is Saudi Arabia too. And this is a historical opportunity for them to implement that in Gaza. And some of these figures, the extreme right religious Zionist movement inside of Israel, are saying that this is our one and only opportunity. This is an opportunity that we haven't had for a very long time to have settlements in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and later on in Saudi Arabia and Sinai as well. However, that's very far from the truth and very far from the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is the Israelis have been facing the fiercest resistance ever in North Gaza, in Jabalia, and the Palestinian resistance had many surprises for them in the past couple of days. The first significant thing is that Al-Qassam brigades, they had, and I'll tell you all about the attacks, they had attacks on a soldier gathering, wounding and killing many of them in North Gaza. In Jabalia, they targeted a group of Israeli genocide soldiers with a TBG missile. They targeted other gatherings with mortar shellings. They destroyed a tank with a Palestinian-made Shuwath bomb, and they sent an anti-personnel bomb on a group of genocide soldiers too. In An-Nusayrat refugee camp, they targeted a troop carrier that was completely destroyed with the Yasin 105. They destroyed 2 Merkavas, and they had a landmine, a side bomb against an Israeli vehicle. They took down a quadcopter that belongs to Israel, and they forced the genocide troops to withdraw or retreat to outside the Nusayrat area. Israel responded with their typical manner, targeting the civilians as punishment to cover up their failure when it comes to the resistance. This is what Israel always does and has been doing. But the most significant thing is the ambush that the Palestinian resistance had, where in Beit Hanun and Beit Lahiya, they had 2 ambushes. Beit Lahiya and Beit Hanun were some of the most northern parts of Gaza, where what Israel calls the general's plan is being implemented, that has faced so much destruction. We've been talking about the destruction level of war crimes committed by these terrorists inside of Gaza. But the more significant thing is the fact that the Al-Qassam brigades not only targeted soldier gatherings, but also released Palestinians who were kidnapped by the genocide soldiers in those areas. Meaning that it's the Palestinian side releasing Palestinian hostages from the genocide soldiers inside of Gaza. This is something very significant. That's a blow. And all of these attacks, by the way, they will not be confirmed by the Israeli side. They only confirmed today that 3 of their soldiers killed, without elaborating too much, in Gaza because of one of the ambushes that happened a few days ago. But all of these that happened today, they're not talking about this. Nothing is happening inside of Gaza, and they're only showing the level of destruction. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they don't want to show the reality to primarily the Israeli public and then the rest of the world. Now, how is that affecting the negotiations? So Israel is trying to continue this aggression to have more from the Palestinian resistance when it comes to the negotiations. And what we have been hearing, that's first and foremost due to the persistence and perseverance of the Palestinian resistance. No, Israel is actually now giving up some of its previous conditions, right? So we firstly have more declarations coming from Israel and things that prove that on the ground, that there is a big development when it comes to the ceasefire. That's something I've been talking about the past couple of days, again, covering with what we have in the media and trying to read between the lines. But based on the fact that Qatar stepped in again, that Turkey is now involved, that the United States is indeed applying more pressure, Donald Trump appears to be wanting to end this before he comes to office in late January. But also there was an Israeli delegation, and of course apart from that, both Israeli and Hamas delegations being in Cairo at the same time, a Cairo delegation visiting Israel. All of these are indications that there's something going on, because Qatar withdrew before. They said we won't participate again unless we see something genuine. But now what's the interesting part? Well, there was an Israeli delegation in Qatar for a whole week. That's something that we didn't have in the past 14 months. Usually they'll go for, sometimes they'll return back on the day, sometimes they'll stay for 2 or 3 days. But this time they remained there for a week and then were called by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Why did he call them back? To get the briefing and try and see where they reached. And what do we understand from what happened? There are a couple of niggling points remaining, but primarily regarding the names and numbers of the Israelis who would be released in the first phase of the ceasefire. That's something that Hamas is not giving up on. It's been 14 months now, well, after the temporary ceasefire, a year now, and the conditions are still the same. There's a bit of leniency as to a couple of details, but when it comes to these people, Hamas tells them, we will only give you the names one day before, and we can't confirm if they're dead or alive, because Israel killed half of them. Israel confirmed that 33 were killed. By what? By Israeli fire. And that's something that the prisoners of war in Gaza, the Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza, also confirmed when they were released. So what's happening now? Well, Hamas are not backing. They're telling them we can't give you more than that in the first phase, and we're going to have to leave the heavyweights up until the last phase. Why? Because we need to ensure that everything is implemented. We're not going to give you everything you want on a silver plate. And if you want everything on a silver plate immediately, then you're going to have to give us everything on a silver plate immediately too. And that's something that Israel isn't interested in giving the Palestinian side. However, Israel, so far, according to reports coming from Israel, gave up two main conditions. One condition in relation to the people returning to the north, and the second one is the fact that they will not be having checks carried out on these people. So Israel before wanted to ban everyone from going back to the north. Hamas insisted, no, everyone who was expelled from any part in Gaza needs to go back to where they came from, to where they were expelled from. Okay. Then Israel said, well, that's why we have the Netzarim axis now in central Gaza to check everyone. We can't have armed figures going back to the north. Hamas told them still, no. Now apparently Israel is giving up. And why is Israel saying that? They're saying it's going to be difficult to have a mechanism implemented in central Gaza that will check all of these people going back to the north. How are we going to do that? It's not going to be possible. This is their excuse. But these things are very significant. And that proves that the Palestinian negotiator, despite all of the disaster in Gaza, is negotiating from a position of power. It's negotiating from a position of power, not from a position of weakness. If the Palestinian negotiator was negotiating from a position of weakness, they would have given in and would have been begging for any ceasefire, just asking Israel to stop. That's it. Beg for a ceasefire and have everything you want. That's not happening. That is not happening. And we're seeing more Israeli concessions. However, from the Israeli side, one of the biggest problems is for Israel to reach a ceasefire. Apart from the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to secure his future, and there are certain indications that he has secured his future by now, after he reaches a ceasefire with Gaza, if he does, because he implemented it in Lebanon, his radical allies remained with him, and from his perspective, he's telling them, well, look, you accepted it in Lebanon, now accept it again in Gaza. There is no problem. Even someone like Itamar Ben-Gvir said, I objected the ceasefire in Lebanon, but I'm not going to leave the government because, I need to remain there to apply pressure. This is his excuse. So what's preventing them from having it in Gaza? Because these people, at the end of the day, they are greedy. They want, positions, and they want money. Smotrich is the finance minister, and Ben-Gvir had a top job that he could never have had in his dreams. This man is a convicted terrorist inside of Israel, who is now the national security minister, right? Minister of National Security. And also Smotrich has a position of a minister in the Ministry of Defense, right? There are many ministers without a file even in Netanyahu's government, total corruption. But Netanyahu probably secured the day after, but the thing that Netanyahu doesn't want and Israel does not want is the fact that people will say, well, Israel gave up, Hamas defeated them, or it's not in their favor, or after all of these people who were killed, all of a sudden you want to reach ceasefire. Where have we reached? They don't want that. And that's why Netanyahu is leaning more towards a phase-based ceasefire rather than an all-out ceasefire, because that would look like a bigger blow. Although many people in the military and political establishment, and many, primarily families of the prisoners of war in Gaza, are asking for all in exchange for all. A ceasefire with all in exchange for all Palestinian prisoners, all just over 10,000, in exchange for all of the Israelis. Why? Because, the recent events, from the beginning up until now, shows the Israelis that the longer our people stay in Gaza, the more likely that they're going to be killed, and killed by our government. The families of the Israelis held in Gaza, they only blame Netanyahu and their government and their military, everyone in charge, that they are killing their people. but primarily Benjamin Netanyahu. They're killing the prisoners of war inside of Gaza because Netanyahu persists to prolong this for his own career purposes. And there, of course, have been developments when it comes to Netanyahu himself, when it comes to the ICC arrest warrants, the fact that he is now having to go and to the courts and face this corruption file against him. All these things are problematic. And when it comes to the ICC, that's also leverage being used against Benjamin Netanyahu from foreign countries, regardless of how much they're allied with him, how much they support him, how much they love Israel, how much they cover up the genocide. They can have more leverage against Benjamin Netanyahu, and they're not necessarily in line with everything he says, especially in the form of the United States, the most significant player in all of this. Because the United States, don't forget, they tried to have some sort of a soft coup inside of Israel when their political delegations were trying to meet with the head of the IDF, the chief of staff. And then Netanyahu did not allow. Blinken tried to meet Halevi, and then the government banned him, and they also banned him from visiting Gaza. Of course, they're allies. Of course, the United States is the big enabler, the US administration. And in many cases, they are more responsible than Israel for allowing this. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't have any differences. Even with someone like Donald Trump, who is receiving so much money or has received so much money from the Zionist lobby inside of the US. What does that all say, and where could things lead us to? Okay. It says that, well, there are, at the end of the day, more efforts being made to try and reach a ceasefire. How would Israel like that ceasefire to be? They would like that ceasefire to be similar to the ceasefire in Lebanon, where Israel doesn't immediately withdraw, and they can still on the ground breach it with a side agreement with the United States, to be arrogant in front of their own population and the whole world, saying that, look, we can still do whatever we want inside of Lebanon, and Hezbollah wouldn't dare lift a finger. In Gaza, it's going to be more difficult to achieve that. Why? Because Lebanon, they did not have Israeli prisoners of war, and one of the biggest factors and some of the strongest cards when it comes to the Palestinian resistance is the prisoners of war of Israel inside of Gaza. Netanyahu tried to get rid of all of them. He couldn't. And he was very frustrated about that. Netanyahu targeted the prisoners of war, the Israelis inside of Gaza, hundreds of times to try and kill them. And he killed many of them, at least a half. Israel confirms 33 have been killed. Like I said, many of those who were released confirmed that they were targeted by Israeli strikes. Yet, Netanyahu is still now trying to have a deal with Gaza that will somewhat show him as the victor, as the person who did not really give in to the demands of Hamas, and he will try and sell it with anything. So he already has a package. He says, look, I destroyed Gaza, I killed 50,000 people, I killed Sinwar, and I targeted Hezbollah, and he has what to say. But when it comes to the deal, it's going to be obvious. It's going to be obvious for everyone that, well, Israel indeed agreed to a ceasefire in the end. And so why did we go and send all of these people, and why were we there for you? So he has to come up with a formula that would be acceptable. So he wants to tell the Israeli public, look, I released X amounts of prisoners of war in the first knock, and look, Hamas are not going to be in power. He's going to try and come up with something to say that. But again, Israeli media, they have been saying, and you know, we've been talking about that in the past couple of weeks, that we don't know what the day after in Gaza might look like. That would be dependent on the day after the war. The day after the war, we'll only know what happens in Gaza. They're already setting the ground in the Israeli public mind that Hamas will be there, that no, we will not destroy Hamas, because let's not forget, Netanyahu's first aim was to eliminate the Hamas. Let us not forget that. And again, you know, based on the failure / winning when it comes to a war, tell me what your objectives are and I'll tell you if you won or lost. And Israel already lost. They're doing a lot to try and counter that with the destruction, with the genocide, with the misery, with everything that they're doing. But that's not going to change the reality. The reality is Israel has been defeated. But now they are trying to get themselves out of this without looking like they have been defeated. And Netanyahu is trying to max out with all of the details before he commits to a ceasefire. However, there are developments on that front. That's the first thing that I wanted to share with you. Second thing I wanted to share with you is Ansarullah in Yemen. These people targeted Israel, targeted the Genostate again today with another hypersonic missile on occupied Haifa, and they said it landed on its target. Israel is warning them, and they said, we will be targeting their figures, we will take down the leadership, we will do this, we will do that. And these people are not stopping. But now there's a slight escalation in tone coming from Ansarullah themselves. Okay, what is it? Muhammad al-Houthi, who's one of the senior figures in the movement, is saying, we warn the United States and their aircraft carrier, the USS Harry S. Truman. Its presence in the Red Sea is a declaration of war. It's a threat to Yemeni national security. USS Harry S. Truman should be guarding US coasts and not engage in reckless adventures in the Red Sea. Logical. It makes a lot of sense. But what does he mean by a declaration of war? Was it not a declaration of war before? I'll tell you what that could mean. That could mean that Ansarullah, well, they have had phases in their escalation. They've had phase 1, they had phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. And their beginning of action to this day is dependent on the genocide in Gaza. So every time they have a military statement, they will say, in support and in solidarity of the Palestinian people in Gaza facing a genocide, we carried out this operation, and then they will finish by our operations will continue up until the genocide stops and the siege is lifted. They're still there, but they've had phases. They've had phase 1, limited actions in the Red Sea. Phase 2, more actions in the Red Sea. Phase 3, additional areas. Phase 4, even more areas and more weapons. Phase 5, an escalation with the type of weapons and areas and consistency when it comes to targeting. Are they going to introduce a phase 6 now? That's the question. Because from their perspective, if they're saying the United States is declaring war, that's different than the United States is supporting Israel in the Red Sea and just attacking our forces. And again, the argument is USS Harry S. Truman, go guard US coasts. But the United States wants to sell the impression that we can be present everywhere on Earth and no one has the right to say anything. They will complain about Chinese fighter jets flying over their aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. It's as if, imagine a Russian or a Chinese fighter jets flying over next to the coast of California or Florida or something. And then, and then they'll tell the Americans, oh, it's the freedom of movement. We need freedom of movement. But again, the United States managed through its continued propaganda of its militaristic oligarchy to portray it in the heads of people and the minds of people that, no, this is normal. We can do that, and we can commit mass state-sponsored terror and commit war crimes and support war criminals and coups and destroy democracies. But anyone who opposes us is a terrorist. He does not have that. He does not have that right. And that's what they always try and do with the Palestinian case. Oh, we can target them, but they don't have a right to take action against us. They don't want you to sympathize with Palestine altogether, but sympathize with the Palestinians having the right to resist. From their perspective, that's like out of order. But again, that's collapsing. So I posted, gave you an article the other day about a poll 2/3 of young American Jews, they blatantly supported the Palestinian armed resistance. This is a significant shift. I mean, even with communities who have been well known to be profoundly Zionist, such as the evangelical community inside of the United States, massive changes, not just from the younger generations, but from the older generations. Yet the United States still trying to continue and legitimize its presence. But things are changing. I mean, even Trump himself is saying, we don't want wars. I want to prevent World War III. We'll see how lucky he's going to be with that. And I'm going to end the war in the Middle East. We'll see how truthful he would be with that. He still has militant approaches when it comes to the Palestinian side, very pro-Israel. And he's also warning Iran. These things are concerning. Now, there are mixed opinions when it comes to Donald Trump and what he's doing with Benjamin Netanyahu. So the first one is Donald Trump. Netanyahu is only waiting for Donald Trump to come and give him the okay to do whatever the hell he wants to do. I don't agree with that. I agree with the second opinion. Is that, and that's, by the way, please don't take this as, supporting someone or not supporting someone. But firstly, Benjamin Netanyahu already got what he wanted from the Democrats in the US. But he's been committing a genocide 14 months. Who gave him that? The Democrats gave him that. Biden and Harris. All right, they've been supporting genocide outright, despite popular criticism. More popular criticism than the Republican Party. Although even the Republican Party in the US, there's more criticism now. The second opinion that I personally think might be more accurate is that no, actually, there's more pressure to try and end this before. Why? Well, a couple of things. Number one, Netanyahu already got what he wanted. Biden, he called Netanyahu. Reports said that he swore at him, and he screamed at him, and he shouted at him, and he criticized him very well. Son of a this, son of a that. But he still gave him whatever he needed. He gave him the bombs. He gave him the MK-83, 84, everything to defend themselves, everything to attack, everything to conduct a genocide, everything to kill over 45,000 Palestinians and over 3,000 Lebanese. He was sending him 1-ton bombs to land on tents. And that's what Netanyahu has been doing. What's Donald Trump going to give to Netanyahu that Joe Biden hasn't given him? An okay to have a nuclear bomb? That's not going to happen. That's most likely not going to happen. Because that's goes beyond Israel at that point. It's more likely that there is indeed a certain effort to try and de-escalate. Especially, by the way, with the tone that came from Donald Trump, even regarding Syria, we're not going to be deploying more troops there. He himself withdrew troops from Syria during his term before, between 2016 and 2020. And, his tone when it comes to Turkey is like, oh, they've done an unfriendly move, and, Erdogan is wise, but he's not showing like he's going to do anything. And although they're supporting the SDF and Turkey is backing their opponents, so technically, by the way, the United States is supporting a terrorist group, a group that they consider to be a terrorist group, by the way, affiliated with them. They're not having that much, interest. And that shows you that even the United States, believe it or not, it doesn't appear like they have a clearly defined strategy for the near future. It does not appear to be that they do. It looks like you have senior figures in the establishment in the United States who are acting as nothing but sales representatives to the industries that they represent, really, or push for their interests, the military industrial complex, whatever, banking, anything to do with corporation interests, oil. And they're just trying to prolong it as much as possible. Because firstly, chaos or constant military activity without a clear winner in the end, by the way, and prolonging armed conflicts makes people rich. So people need to understand that very well. But in the long-term strategy, the maintaining even the United States as the biggest superpower in the world, that's not, no one is thinking about that. They're only talking about that with the same broken record of defamation against China and Russia, who are nowhere near angels, of course. But when it comes to their leaders, at least, well, much of what they say makes more sense than what the US leaders say. I mean, Biden himself, we don't know what he was saying even in the past 4 years. I mean, half of the time I was struggling to understand what the man is saying. Stumbling, falling, going blank. So it looks like, judging by the fact that first, we have a ceasefire with Lebanon. That's number one. Israel was saying we want to destroy Hezbollah, but there's a ceasefire with Lebanon. A ceasefire that will return Hezbollah to the same position he was in before entering the war. And that's a massive win. By remaining there, by having 1701 as a resolution, instead of a new resolution. The only difference that now Israel has in Lebanon is they can still attack based on the side agreement that they have from the United States. However, Hezbollah is not interested in re-engaging with that. And judging by how quickly things are moving when it comes to the ceasefire, it looks like some of the prerequisites for a ceasefire with Lebanon were to have a ceasefire with Gaza within 2 months. Because we're not in the 2 months. The 2 months haven't ended yet. So if we do reach a ceasefire in the next 2 months, that means in the next month, because it's been almost a month since the ceasefire in Lebanon, or just less, that means then, oh no, Hezbollah actually had that as a demand. And Iran is sitting there behind. Iran is sitting in the back and looking at the situation with a pending response. A pending True Promise 3. Will Israel go down the path of behaving and stopping to commit genocide and war crimes and killing children, like the Iranian president said, Pezeshkian, to receive a slightly more moderate blow? Or will they escalate, Israel, will they escalate and receive a full fat response in the form of True Promise 3? Because Iran, from their side, they would have to respond against Israel. Iran doesn't have an option. If they don't respond, they've set a precedent. And it's all about deterrence, and it's all about setting precedents now. If Iran does not respond, and again, they're entitled to give up their response if they want to, if they see that certain political objectives have been met, right? They can do that. If they don't, though, if they do not respond, they will tell Israel, no problem, you can attack us again and we won't respond. And that's problematic. That's problematic from an Iranian national security perspective. That puts them in more harm. They can rely on the fact that they have developed a better air defense system, for example, and they took down the majority of the projectiles in the Israeli attack on them, but that's not necessarily going to be enough.